My name is Walter Caldwell. I am 68 years old, and for the past 5 months I have been pretending to forget my own name. Not completely, not in a way that would raise alarm from the people who actually loved me. Just enough to convince one particular man that the time had finally come to make his move. He made it. 3 weeks ago, at the dinner I hosted to celebrate what would have been my 45th wedding anniversary with my late wife, Caroline. 160 guests. The private dining room at Langdon Hall in Cambridge, Ontario. Candlelight. White hydrangeas. A pianist playing the same Norah Jones song Caroline and I had slow danced to at our daughter's wedding 11 years ago. And my son-in-law, sitting 4 chairs away from me, quietly tipping something into my glass of Scotch while the room was distracted by the arrival of the dessert cart. He thought I was looking at the door. I was watching his reflection in the silver serving tray on the wall behind him. Before I tell you what happened when that drink reached someone else's lips, I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city in the comments below, and please subscribe if you believe that a man who has spent 40 years in the Canadian bush building something from nothing cannot be outmaneuvered by a man who has spent his whole life taking things from other people. The room was everything Caroline would have approved of. She had always said that if you were going to do something, you did it properly, or you did not do it at all. She was a woman who ironed her tea towels and apologized to no one for it. 23 months she had been gone. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the last morning I held her hand in the palliative care unit at Grand River Hospital. 7 weeks was not enough time to prepare. I do not think 45 years would have been enough time to prepare, but 7 weeks was brutal. I had sold Caldwell Timber Solutions the previous spring. 41 years of work. A company I had started with a second-hand skidder, a line of credit my father co-signed, and the kind of stubbornness that gets mistaken for courage when things go well. By the time I sold it to a Vancouver-based forestry group, we had over 200 employees, contracts across 3 provinces, and a reputation that I was genuinely proud of. The sale closed at $4.3 million after taxes and fees. It was more money than I had ever expected to hold in my hands. It was also, as I would soon discover, more money than certain people in my family could stop thinking about. My son-in-law's name is Brendan. He was 44 years old. Tall, the kind of man who kept himself fit not out of discipline but out of vanity. He had this particular way of standing in a room slightly forward on the balls of his feet, like he was always about to take something. He had met my daughter Rachel at a conference in Toronto 8 years ago. He called himself a wealth manager. He wore suits that cost more than my first truck. He had the kind of easy confidence that I had once mistaken for competence. Sitting beside him at my table that evening was his older brother, a man I will call only my son-in-law's brother. He was a lawyer in Hamilton. He specialized, according to his own website, in estate planning and what the legal profession delicately calls incapacity planning. The first time I learned that phrase, I had to sit with it for a moment. Incapacity planning. Planning for when someone becomes incapable, or in their case, planning to make someone appear incapable before that time naturally arrives. Rachel was on my son-in-law's other side. She looked thin. She had always been a solid woman, her mother's daughter, sturdy and direct, and quick to laugh. The woman sitting beside him that evening looked like someone had been slowly turning down the volume on her for years. She smiled when he smiled. She deferred to him in every sentence. When she reached for her wine, her eyes went to him first, just for a fraction of a second, checking. I recognized what that fraction of a second meant. Caroline had pointed it out to me 2 years before she got sick. "There's something not right there, Walter," she had said, watching them from across our backyard at a Canada Day barbecue. "That man is slowly making our daughter disappear." I had not wanted to see it then. I saw it clearly now. I tapped my fork against my glass and the room settled. "Thank you," I said, "for being here." Caroline would have called this excessive. She would have said we could have done this at the Legion for a fraction of the price and had a better time. There was laughter. Warm laughter. The kind you only get from people who actually knew the person you're describing. 45 years ago, a 23-year-old woman with considerably better judgment than me agreed to marry a man who showed up to their third date with sawdust in his hair and a borrowed tie. She spent the next 4 decades being right about almost everything, and I spent those same 4 decades pretending I had come up with all the good ideas myself. More laughter. Softer this time. I paused. I looked at Rachel. She was crying quietly, pressing her napkin to the corner of her eye. My son-in-law had his arm around her shoulders, but his eyes were on me. Patient, calculating. I raised my glass to Caroline, I said. To the woman who built this family. The room rose with me. I watched my son-in-law lift his glass and drink. Then I watched his eyes move deliberately to the glass in front of me. The doctored one. He wanted to see me drink it. I raised it toward my lips, tilted it just far enough to feel the cold rim, and then turned slightly as though distracted by a voice behind me. I set the glass back down without taking a drop. Across the table, he kept watching. I excused myself to greet some old friends from my days with the Ontario Forestry Association. I had been watching my son-in-law for 4 months and 3 weeks. It started the way most discoveries start, not with suspicion, but with a small, quiet feeling of wrongness that I could not immediately name. It was the week after I deposited the sale proceeds. He had called me, not Rachel, him. He said he had been thinking about my financial situation. He said the banks would offer me low-yield products because they did not have the sophistication to understand high-net-worth planning. He said he had access to investment opportunities that were generating 17% annual returns. He said I should let him manage the portfolio. He said it in the way that men like him say things, not as a request, but as a gracious offer, as though he were doing me a favor by allowing me to give him my money. I told him I had a financial planner I trusted, and that I was happy with my RRSP and TFSA allocations. Thank you very much. He did not give up. 3 days later, Rachel called. She sounded strained, over-rehearsed, the way she had sounded at 11 years old, when she was trying to convince me to let her do something she already knew I would refuse. Dad, we've been worried about you. You've been alone a lot since Mom. We just think maybe Brendan could take some of the financial pressure off you. He really is very good at what he does. I told her I would think about it. Instead, I called my longtime family solicitor, a woman I had worked with since the early days of the company. I told her something felt wrong. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Walter, give me 2 weeks." She gave me a file in 12 days. My son-in-law had not filed a tax return in 2 years. 3 former clients had lodged complaints with the Ontario Securities Commission. 2 of those complaints described what sounded very much like fraudulent misrepresentation, promising returns that did not exist, redirecting funds, delaying statements. He was behind on his mortgage. His car was leased under a numbered company that existed for no apparent reason. And his brother, the lawyer, the estate specialist, had recently filed 4 applications for emergency guardianship orders on behalf of family members seeking control over elderly relatives' financial affairs. 4. In 2 years. I sat with that file for a long time. I thought about Caroline saying that Rachel was disappearing. I thought about what it would mean if they succeeded. And then I made a decision that a younger version of me might have been too proud to make. I decided to look exactly like what they thought I was. A tired old man, a widower rattled by grief, a father who was losing his sharpness at precisely the moment he had the most to lose. I started slowly. I began repeating stories at family dinners, the same anecdote twice in one evening, as though I had forgotten I had already told it. I misplaced my reading glasses. I mentioned, with what I hoped sounded like genuine distress, that I had forgotten a dentist appointment that I had in fact deliberately not written down. Once, when my son-in-law was visiting, I stood in my own kitchen for 30 seconds, looking at the kettle as though I could not remember what I had meant to do with it. He noticed. I could see it in the careful, controlled way his expression did not change. My solicitor, meanwhile, hired a firm to do what she called comprehensive due diligence. Security consultants came to my house under the cover of visiting tradespeople and installed cameras in my study, my living room, and the hallway outside my bedroom. We documented everything. Phone calls, emails, one meeting in a coffee shop in Burlington where the 2 brothers sat across from each other for 90 minutes, and the body language told most of the story even before we had the transcription. 11 days before the anniversary dinner, we caught what we needed. My son-in-law was in my study, the room I had told him I never used anymore, because it reminded me of the work I used to do, and he was on his phone. His brother was on the other end. "The dinner is perfect," my son-in-law said. "He'll be emotional. He's already showing signs. I'll put something in his drink during the toast. He'll start slurring, getting confused. With 160 people watching, everyone will see it happen." His own guests. A pause. "You have the application ready?" His brother's voice came through clearly. "Ready to file Monday morning. Capacity assessment is already arranged. Dr. Ashworth has agreed to provide the opinion." Another pause. Then my son-in-law. "Once we have the order, we move the funds into the management account within 48 hours, before anyone realizes what's happened." My solicitor stopped the recording. I looked at the wall for a moment. I was not surprised. I had been expecting something like this. But there is a difference between suspecting a thing and hearing it said out loud in your own home, in the room where you used to sit with your wife and read beside the fire on winter evenings. "I want him to try it," I said. She looked at me carefully. "Walter, I want him to believe he has won. I want him standing in my living room, thinking it is over, and then I want him to understand, in the most complete possible way, that it is not." She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "All right, here is how we do it." The dinner proceeded. I moved through the room. I greeted guests. I let my voice waver slightly at the moments he was watching. I allowed myself to be guided gently to my seat, as though my legs were uncertain. And then, at the precise moment when the dessert cart rolled in from the kitchen, and every head in the room turned toward the noise and the smell of warm butter tarts and maple creme brulee, I watched my son-in-law reach toward my glass. 2 seconds. It took me less than 2 seconds. I had planned to swap my glass with a glass at the next table, an empty one belonging to a guest who had stepped away. But when I rounded back to my seat from behind the row of chairs, I saw that the empty glass was gone. A server had cleared it. The only available glass within reach, unattended and full, belonged to my son-in-law's brother, who had stood up briefly to speak with someone behind him. I made the decision in a single breath. I was an old man with an unsteady hand. I stumbled slightly against the back of his chair, caught myself, touched his shoulder with an apologetic murmur. In the same motion, the glasses exchanged positions. He sat back down, reached automatically for the glass nearest his right hand, and took a long drink before he had even settled into his seat. I sat down across from them. My glass, now clean, untouched, sat in front of me. I picked it up and raised it toward a couple at the far end of the table who were looking in my direction. My son-in-law was watching me, waiting, expecting. I gave him nothing. His smile, which had been calibrated all evening, began to slip by degrees. And then his brother made a sound. It started as a cough, a sudden, reflexive cough that drew the eyes of the people nearest to him. He pressed his fist to his mouth. Then his hand went flat against the table, and he pushed with it, as though trying to stabilize the room. The color left his face so quickly, it was like watching a blind come down. He tried to stand. His chair caught on the hardwood floor and screeched back. He grabbed the edge of the table, and I watched a water glass tip and fall in slow motion, and the sound it made when it hit the floor seemed to crack the entire room open. "What's happening?" Someone near the back shouted. "Call 911. That was one of my former employees. "Someone call 911 right now." My son-in-law was on his feet. What happened to him? What happened?" His voice was 3 notes higher than it had been all evening. His brother was on the floor. Hotel staff converged. A woman near the exit identified herself as a nurse and pushed through. The piano stopped. The room that had been warm with candlelight and quiet conversation became something else entirely. I did not move from my chair. I watched. And then I looked at my son-in-law's face. He was not looking at his brother. He was looking at me. His eyes were doing the calculation, running and rerunning the sequence of events, and I could see the exact moment he understood that something had gone catastrophically wrong with his plan, and he did not yet know what or how. I held his gaze. I did not speak. I simply watched him, the way you watch a man standing on ice that has begun to make sounds. The paramedics arrived in 9 minutes. My son-in-law's brother was stabilized on the floor of Langdon Hall's private dining room, loaded onto a stretcher, and taken out through the service entrance while the guests were guided toward the lobby by staff. The white hydrangeas were crushed underfoot. The pianist had packed up and gone. I rode to Cambridge Memorial with my solicitor driving. It worked, I said. She did not respond immediately. Then, yes, and a man nearly died. A man who was planning to help destroy my daughter's life and put me in a locked ward. I know. She paused. That doesn't make tonight easy. It did not. I will not pretend otherwise. The emergency waiting room smelled like disinfectant and burned coffee. Rachel was in a plastic chair with her coat still on and her hands pressed together in her lap. She looked like she was praying, or trying to remember how. My son-in-law was pacing. He was very good at appearing to be a worried man. If I had not spent 5 months watching him, I might have believed it. I sat down beside Rachel and put my hand over hers. Dad. She turned to look at me and her eyes were red. He just collapsed. Right at the table. What happened? I don't know, sweetheart, I said. I'm so sorry. My son-in-law stopped pacing and looked at me. You were right there, he said. His voice was careful. Level. Did you see anything? Did he eat something, drink something that seemed off to you? I shook my head slowly. I'm afraid my memory of the last hour is all a bit muddled. I get overwhelmed at these kinds of events. Too many people. I rubbed the side of my head with 2 fingers. I really couldn't say. I watched him process this. I watched him try to locate the flaw in a plan that had seemed airtight 72 hours ago. He had put the drug in my glass. He had watched me lift it. He had assumed the rest assumed it because he believed what he wanted to believe about old men at emotional events. The doctor came out. She was in her late 30s, efficient and direct in the way that emergency physicians learn to be. She looked at the 3 of us. He's stable. We administered activated charcoal and supportive treatment. He's going to need monitoring overnight. She looked at her clipboard, then back at us. His blood work came back positive for a significant concentration of clonazepam. That is a prescription sedative. In the dose present, it would cause extreme sedation, loss of coordination, and in some cases, as we saw tonight, it can trigger a seizure-like episode. This was not an accidental ingestion. She said this last sentence, without emphasis, which made it land harder than if she had shouted it. I am legally required to report this to Waterloo Regional Police. Rachel made a small sound. My son-in-law said very smoothly, Of course, we want to cooperate fully. This is a shock for all of us. 2 detectives arrived within the hour. They were thorough. They interviewed each of us separately in a consultation room that had clearly been designed for difficult conversations. 2 chairs, a small table, nothing else. When my son-in-law came out, his jaw was set and his eyes were moving quickly, the way eyes move when a man is reassessing. The detective who spoke with me was a compact woman in her 40s who asked questions the way people do when they already know most of the answers and are watching to see which direction you fill in the gaps. I told her I had not seen anything specific. I told her my memory was unreliable these days. I told her I had been having a difficult time since my wife's passing and that large events tended to overwhelm me. I told her all of this in the trembling voice of a man who was just barely managing. She studied me for a moment after I finished. There was something in her expression that I could not quite name. Then she thanked me and let me go. In the hallway, my son-in-law was waiting. You don't look well, he said. Long night, I said. He stepped slightly closer, not aggressive, just close enough that it was intentional. You should go home and rest. Rachel and I will stay with him. You don't need to be here. She's my daughter, I said mildly. I'll stay a while. He looked at me for 3 full seconds. Then he walked away. I did not go home that night. My solicitor had a room booked at a hotel in Kitchener. I sat in the chair by the window and looked at the lights of the city and thought about the 4.5 decades I had spent becoming the person I was. I thought about my first winter running logging equipment in -30 weather north of Sudbury, with frozen fingers and a borrowed sleeping bag. I thought about the year the company nearly went under, and Caroline sold her grandmother's jewelry without telling me, and put the money into the operating account to keep us from folding. I thought about what it meant that someone had looked at everything I had built and seen only a number worth taking. 3 days later, my son-in-law called. His voice was gentle, concerned. He said Rachel was very upset about what had happened to his brother, and that they had been speaking with a specialist, a doctor who worked with older adults navigating grief and cognitive change, and would I be willing to sit down with all of them? Just a quiet family conversation at my house. Nothing formal. Of course, I said. My voice was tired and slightly confused. I've been so scattered lately. Maybe it would help to talk to someone. He arrived that evening with Rachel and a man he introduced as Dr. Pemberton, a geriatric specialist from Mississauga. The man was in his 60s, silver-haired, with reading glasses on a chain and a leather bag that looked very medical. His name, my solicitor had confirmed 2 days earlier, was not Pemberton. His name was Gary Slode. He had surrendered his Ontario medical license in 2019 following an investigation into falsified cognitive assessments provided in support of guardianship applications. 3 of those applications had subsequently been overturned. I let them guide me to my own living room couch. I looked at the floor with the unfocused expression of a man who does not know why he is tired, but is very tired. "Walter," said the man calling himself Pemberton, "your family is concerned about you. They've noticed some changes over the past several months. Forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating, confusion in situations that previously would not have troubled you." He folded his hands. "These things are nothing to be ashamed of. They are very common in men of your age, particularly following a bereavement." "I feel fine most of the time," I said slowly. "I just get a bit muddled." "That's exactly what we're here to address." He reached into his leather bag and produced a folder. "Your family wants to make sure you are protected, that your affairs are being managed by people who care about you. We have some paperwork here that would allow Rachel and Brendan to provide that support in a formal capacity." Rachel was watching me with an expression I recognized. She was trying to believe that this was love. She wanted it to be love. I had seen that expression on her face for years whenever she looked at her husband, the desperate, effortful wanting it to be true. My son-in-law leaned forward. "Dad." "He only called me that when he wanted something. You've been struggling. Everyone at the dinner saw it. And now, with what happened to my brother, we don't know what occurred that night. But I think we can all agree that you shouldn't be dealing with the stress of managing millions of dollars alone at this stage of your life." There it was, the actual sentence. The thing they had been building toward for 5 months. "I don't know," I said, looking at the folder. "This all seems very fast." My son-in-law's expression shifted. It was subtle. If you had not been watching for it, you would have missed it entirely. The patience wearing thin. The calculation beneath the warmth. "Walter." His voice dropped, low enough that only I could hear. "You need to sign those papers. If you don't, I'm going to have a conversation with those detectives about what I observed at the dinner. You were the closest person to my brother's glass. Your fingerprints were on that table. Do you understand what I'm saying? An old man with memory problems who poisoned his own son-in-law's brother at a dinner party. Who do you think they will believe?" I looked at him for a long moment, and then I sat up straight. The tremor left my hands. My voice came out clear and level, the voice I had used for 40 years on job sites and in boardrooms and in every difficult conversation that had ever mattered. "That," I said, "is a very interesting question, Brendan." He froze. "Margaret," I said, loudly enough to carry to the hallway. The door to my study opened. My solicitor walked out. Beside her were 2 plainclothes officers from Waterloo Regional Police, a woman from the Ontario Securities Commission who had been building a file on my son-in-law's investment activities for 8 months, and a man from a private security firm holding a laptop showing 4 live camera feeds of my living room. My son-in-law stood up so quickly his chair rocked backward. What is this?" "This," my solicitor said, "is a recording of you attempting to fraudulently obtain power of attorney and guardianship over a mentally competent adult through coercion and falsified medical documentation. It is also a recording of you threatening to fabricate evidence in connection with a criminal investigation." She looked at the man who had called himself Pemberton. "And this, I expect, you know, is Mr. Gary Slode, who is not a physician." Slode went very pale. One of the officers moved toward my son-in-law. "Brendan," he began, "this is insane." My son-in-law turned to Rachel. "Rachel, tell them. Tell them. This is insane. Your father has been behaving erratically for months. You've seen it yourself. Tell them." Rachel had not moved from her chair. She was looking at her husband with an expression I had not seen on her face in years. Not confusion, not grief, something harder than both. "Play it," I said to the man with the laptop. The television on my wall came on. It was footage from a security camera installed in my son-in-law's home office 4 months earlier, during a period when Rachel had invited me for dinner, and he had not been home. We had obtained consent and a production order. Everything was clean. On the screen, my son-in-law was on the phone. His voice came through clearly. Rachel has no idea the extent of it. She thinks this is about taking care of her father. I've been managing her for years. She'll believe whatever I tell her. A pause. Once the guardianship order goes through and we have access to the accounts, I'm done. I'm not staying in this marriage one day longer than I have to. Give her enough to keep her quiet and I'm gone. I've got contacts in the Cayman Islands. The money will be untraceable inside a month. The screen went dark. The room was absolutely silent. Rachel made no sound. She did not cry. She sat perfectly still in her chair with her hands in her lap, and she stared at the blank television screen with an expression I cannot fully describe. It was the expression of someone watching the architecture of their life come apart not with drama, but with the slow, undeniable weight of something that has been failing for a long time finally reaching the ground. "Rachel," her husband said. His voice had changed again. It was urgent now, frightened. "Rachel, listen to me." That's out of context. You know how I talk when I'm stressed. You know me. Tell them you know me. She turned to look at him, and she said nothing. The officers arrested my son-in-law and Gary slowed. 2 additional officers arrived within the hour, with a warrant related to the Securities Commission investigation. My son-in-law's brother, I would learn the following morning, had already been interviewed at the hospital, and had provided a statement claiming he had no knowledge of the drugging. The subsequent investigation would find a different story in his emails. After they were gone, Rachel and I sat together in my living room for a long time. I did not try to fill the silence. I had learned, in 45 years with Caroline, that silence after something shatters is not empty. It is full. It deserves space. Eventually, Rachel said, "How long did you know?" 5 months, I said. "Almost 6. She nodded slowly. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "Not what, but something." She looked at her hands. "He kept telling me you were getting confused, that you were making bad decisions." I started to believe it. I started to believe that what I was seeing, the way you handled yourself, the way you've always handled yourself, was me being naive, that he could see something I couldn't. She paused. He did that with everything, made me doubt what I could see with my own eyes. I reached over and took her hand. "That's not your fault," I said. "I let him talk me into doubting my own father. He was very good at it," I said. "That's what these people do. It's not a reflection of how much you love me. It's a reflection of how skilled he was at taking something real, your concern for me after your mother died, and using it." She leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she had done as a small child watching hockey games she did not understand but wanted to be part of because I was watching them. I put my arm around her, and we sat there while the house settled around us in the dark. The legal proceedings took 9 months. My son-in-law faced charges under the Criminal Code of Canada, including fraud over $5,000, criminal harassment, uttering threats, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The Ontario Securities Commission filed separate civil proceedings related to his investment activities. Gary Slode pleaded guilty to fraud and professional misrepresentation in exchange for cooperation. My son-in-law's brother was convicted of conspiracy following a trial in which the email evidence proved decisive. He received a 30-month sentence. My son-in-law went to trial. He retained an expensive lawyer from Toronto and put on a performance of wronged innocence that was technically impressive. The jury was not impressed. The video was not something that could be explained away. His own voice, in his own office, saying the things that he had said. 12 years. The judge noted at sentencing that the deliberate targeting of a grieving widow and his elderly father-in-law, combined with the procurement of a fraudulent medical professional and the corruption of what should have been a family occasion, represented an aggravated breach of the trust that families depend upon. I was in the courtroom for the verdict. I watched my son-in-law's face when the foreman read it. I had expected perhaps to feel something large. I felt something quieter than I expected. Not satisfaction exactly, more like the release of a breath held for too long. He looked at me as they let him out. His expression said several things, none of them worth recording. I held his gaze and said nothing. There was nothing I needed him to understand. Rachel did not come to the sentencing. She was in her first week at a new position, a project coordinator role at an architectural firm in Guelph, work she had trained for and abandoned in the early years of her marriage, because her husband had made it clear, in all the indirect ways that controlling people make things clear, that her work was less important than her availability. She was good at the job. I had known she would be. The recovery was not linear. It never is. She moved back into the house for several months, not as a retreat, but as a reset. We ate dinner together most evenings. We argued about hockey, which we had always done, and about whether Tim Hortons had become irredeemably mediocre, which we had also always done. Slowly, gradually, the woman I had known came back. Not the same woman. She was harder in some ways, quieter in others. More careful about trust, which is not a bad thing when you have learned the cost of misplacing it. One evening in late autumn, maybe 8 months after the trial, she came and found me in the study. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something." She sat across from me with her hands folded. "I knew," she said, "not everything, not the money, not the specific plan, but I knew he didn't love me. I think I knew it within the first 2 years. I just couldn't make myself stop." She looked up at me. "How do you not hate me for that? For choosing him over you? For letting him tell me you were losing your mind and not pushing back harder?" I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about Caroline. I thought about all the years I had spent watching this woman become exactly who she was supposed to be before someone came along and began the slow work of undoing her. "Because you're here," I said, "and you're you again. That's the only thing that matters to me." She cried. We both did. A little. It was the good kind. I did not retire. I had thought I might, after the sale. I had thought that $4.3 million and a house I owned outright meant that the work part of my life was finished. But the previous year had shown me something I had not expected, that I was not finished, not even close, and that the money could mean something more than security. My solicitor and I talked about it over dinner at a restaurant in Cambridge that Caroline had liked. "What do you actually want to do?" she asked. "I want to help people who are where I was," I said. "Older people. People whose families are doing to them what was done to me. People who don't have the resources to find out the truth and fight back." She set down her wine glass. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said. We incorporated the Caldwell Foundation 8 months after the trial concluded. We focused on 3 areas: legal support for elderly Ontarians facing fraudulent guardianship applications, financial investigation services for those who suspected exploitation by family members, and a partnership with the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic to extend those services across the Golden Horseshoe. We set up a telephone line. Within the first 3 months, we had 42 cases. Not all of them resolved well. Some of them resolved the way things resolve when you get involved too late. But some of them, enough of them, ended with a frightened person getting their life back. Rachel came to work with us. She had started answering phones on weekends as a volunteer, and within 6 months she was running the intake process and redesigning our case management system. She had a particular gift for the work that I think came from her own experience. She understood, in a way that could not be taught, exactly how these situations develop. The small surrenders that accumulate into captivity. The slow erosion of a person's trust in their own perception. She sat with families, and she told them her story, and she helped them see that the damage was not permanent, that the person they had been before still existed somewhere underneath what had been done to them. I was prouder of her in those months than I had words for. Last week I was reviewing intake files on a Tuesday morning when my assistant knocked on the door and told me there was a young woman in the waiting area who had come in without an appointment. She was in her early 30s, she said. She had driven from Brantford. She had a folder of documents under her arm, and she had been crying in her car for 20 minutes before coming in. I told her to show her through. She sat down across from me and she put the folder on the table between us. "My father," she said, "he's 71. My stepmother and her son from her first marriage, they've been isolating him from us for 2 years. He doesn't answer his own phone anymore. His bank statements show transfers we can't explain. And last week he called my sister from a number we didn't recognize, and he said she stopped, steadied herself. He said he was scared. I looked at this young woman who had driven 45 minutes on a Tuesday morning because her father was scared. I thought about what it had felt like to sit in a hospital waiting room, knowing that the man pacing across the room had tried to hollow out my life. I thought about Caroline. I thought about Rachel. I thought about what it had cost and what had been recovered. I picked up my phone and called my solicitor. "I need you in my office," I said. "We have a new case." She was there in 20 minutes. To the woman across from me, I said, "Start at the beginning. Tell me everything." She told me. I listened, and by the time she was finished, I had already begun to understand exactly what had been done and how we would begin to undo it. There are people who believe that age diminishes a person, that grief softens the mind, that a man who has lost the woman he built his life with is a man who has lost his footing. There are people who look at gray hair and see an opportunity. I spent 41 years in the Canadian bush. I have worked in weather that would stop a clock. I have rebuilt things from the ground up more than once. I know the difference between a tree that is dead and a tree that is waiting for spring. And I know that the most dangerous thing you can do is mistake the second kind for the first. My name is Walter Caldwell. I am 68 years old. I run a foundation in Cambridge, Ontario, that helps people who have been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to love them. And every morning I come to work, I think about a man who looked across a candlelit table at a widower and saw only a number. He is thinking about me now too, I expect. He has 9 years left to think about where he went wrong. I hope the thinking does him some good.